This one's important because it pretty much affects every single one of us. The latest version of Donald Trump's big, beautiful bill has just been released. You can actually read it yourself on the House.gov website under the Ways and Means section, although be warned, it is 389 pages long. So instead, what I'm going to do in this video is, in plain English, as simple as I can, I'm going to break down all the important parts related to the tax issues. Now, in my opinion, there are four main things that need to be covered with a various few other things. The main ones are renewing Trump's tax cuts, and then the three major promises that he made. No taxes on tips, no taxes on Social Security, and no taxes on overtime pay. And there are some good things here, as well as some things that I would have liked to see differently. And one more thing before we begin, we're going to analyze these things purely from a tax perspective. Because yes, this bill has to be paid for somehow. And of course, it's going to be paid for with budget deficit increases and by increasing the national debt. The reason why I want to look at this bill by itself is because those things are going to happen anyway, because as you and I know, our government has a spending problem. So let's try to analyze this bill just as a tax bill. Okay, with that said, and without further ado, as always, my name is Derek. I got my degree in finance. You don't have to. Let's dive right in. Okay, so the first major one, and I think, in my opinion, this is the major thing that Trump wants to accomplish, and that is renewing his original tax cuts. Now, this is in the bill with some adjustments. So the first thing that we have to understand is that these tax cuts do affect pretty much every single income bracket, although they do affect some income brackets more than others. The thing is, Trump also wants to modify these a little bit. One, he wants to increase the child tax credit. I'm sure you're aware, especially if you have a child, you get a child tax credit on your taxes. This is $2,000. If Trump does not renew his original tax cuts, this would go down to the original amount, which is $1,000. So it is significant. On top of that, Trump wants to increase this amount to $2,500 per child. Now, renewing his original tax cuts is in the bill with this adjustment. Of course, this was his primary goal. But he also listed three major goals. In reality, he listed four major goals. I'll cover that here in a second. But the three main ones that were tax promises from Trump to the American people were, of course, no taxes on tips, no taxes on overtime pay, and no taxes on Social Security. And these are all in the bill, although there are some things that we need to cover. The fourth one that I think maybe could be included was he at one point said that he wanted to basically eliminate income taxes for any income $150,000 and below. That is not in the bill, of course, because that would be extremely expensive. Now let's cover the three major ones, starting with no taxes on overtime pay. Now this is in the bill, but there are some things that we have to talk about. The first is that if you make over $160,000, you would be exempt from this benefit. On top of that, only qualifying tips are going to be included. So what this means is that only qualifying occupations, and this is yet to be released, only qualifying occupations that traditionally receive tips as part of compensation will be included in this. This is, of course, like your waiters and waitresses, probably hairstylists, anything that traditionally is included or traditionally receives tips as part of compensation. Now, of course, the main reason for this is so like business owners or executives don't start classifying their income as tips so then they can avoid paying income taxes. So this is in the bill. The two major points, though, is of course that if you make over $160,000, you would not be included in this, and it has to be a qualifying occupation. The last thing that probably needs to be talked about is that this would only be valid through 2028. So in reality, just about 2.5 years, probably 3 tax years if this is passed soon. Now, overall, if we ignore how we're supposed to pay for this bill and we just look at the tax portion of this bill, in my opinion, there are some pretty good things. one of my major problems with this bill is the limitations, like only extending these benefits through 2028. But hey, no taxes on tips made it into the bill. The next thing is no taxes on overtime pay. Now, this was a major promise, and in my opinion, here there are a few more things to nitpick that I don't really like. So first and foremost, once again, if you make over $160,000 per year, you won't be included in this. But for everybody else, taxes on overtime pay will be eliminated. But here's the thing. It will only be eliminated, or the tax-free portion will only be the overtime portion of your pay. So for example, let's say you make, $50 per hour. Let's say your overtime pay is then $75 per hour, and you put in 10 hours of overtime per week. Only the $25 that is overtime pay times 10, so $250 in this case per week, would be tax-free. Not the entire $75 per hour that you make while you're working overtime. In my opinion, yes, I understand that this would have been a very expensive portion of the bill, but this, it is sort of making good on the promise, but if you're working overtime, you're paid more because overtime is harder to do. If you already worked 40 hours and now you're working 10 or 20 or 30 hours more, that's hard to do. So to only make the tax-free portion the smaller portion that is above your regular pay, in my opinion, I don't really like. I don't think that this is truly making good on the promise, although I'm reasonable and I understand that these are expensive things to do, and they also have to make it through Congress to actually be approved, and there are some very fiscally conservative Republicans who probably don't want to fund this stuff. So yes, it's in the bill, with, of course, some limitations. You can't make over $160,000 per year, and only the actual overtime part of your pay is going to be tax-free. And on top of that, this also expires in 2028. So really you only get 2.5, maybe 3 full tax years to benefit from this. But again, it is in the bill. Okay, now the third one. The third one was no taxes on Social Security. Now this is not in the bill. Let me say that again. This is not in the bill. With that said, we need to explain why, and we need to explain the workaround. So the reason this is not in the bill is because Congress wants to get this passed through the Senate in a process known as reconciliation. Basically, you just need a simple majority. Now, in order to use that process, because if not, you'd need Democrats to actually vote in favor of this, but when you just do a simple majority, you don't, because they hold the majority. In order to do that, you can't really make changes to Social Security. So this wasn't really even an available option to put in the bill if they want to use reconciliation. Although they did try to use a workaround. And in order to do that, they basically gave senior citizens an increased deduction. So while this is not directly a tax-free Social Security income, it is an attempt at a workaround while still trying or allowing them to use the reconciliation process to push this bill through with just a simple majority. Again, of course, there are some limitations to this, and the major one being that this expires in 2028. Okay, so those were the major promises that actually did, to some degree, end up in the tax bill. Now, what are my opinions on this? Well, to be honest, again, if we ignore how we're going to pay for this, which are certain cuts, as well as, in reality, the bulk of this is being paid for through more spending, basically more deficit spending and increasing the national budget. But if we're going to ignore that and just look at this as a tax bill, I think these are going to benefit a lot of Americans. Now, are there, of course, limitations? Yes, because this is an extremely expensive bill. And in reality, I think Trump's main priority is passing his renewing his original tax cuts. But the fact that these are included, and they do have a decent chance of moving through with reconciliation, in my opinion, does make this a relatively decent tax bill for the average American. Now, does this tax bill still favor the wealthy? Absolutely it does. Were we ever actually going to get away from that? Probably not. But this will most likely prove a net positive to a lot of Americans. Now, we do have to understand that this is not finalized. This is going to be adjusted, almost guaranteed to be adjusted and changed and modified as it moves through. And the final bill may or may not include all of these things, or it might be better, it might be worse. We don't know until it is finalized and signed into law. But that is where the current situation stands. So if this update was informative, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel out tremendously. If you like personal finance, world economics, and investing broken down simply, then you are in the right place. So I hope you stick around for the next one. Until then, hope you have a fantastic rest of your day, and I will see you in the next one. Take care.